Morning, everyone. We're just waiting for all those who are joining the waiting room now to be admitted. Zoom's taking just a minute this morning. So welcome to our webinar. This week, we're going to be focusing on PPP loan forgiveness, specifically the application part 1, talking about what's going to be needed and what is necessary. This week, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. I'm going to be doing most of the talking with Melinda available to assist with questions and to give some updates. This is our first of many webinars talking about the actual application. And what we want to stress most importantly is that this application is extremely difficult to follow. You ask us if they did it backwards in a few spots. And it actually took us several times to read it over and try it out for ourselves. We used Jane from our previous webinars, who runs an art shop, as a tester, and it took a few tries to actually get everything right. So to start us off, our agenda today, we're going to be going over a few updates, and then we're going to be going over the who, what, when, where, why, and how to apply for PPP loan forgiveness. Then we are going to be looking at the general information required, what records you're required to keep, which documents that you're required to save but not submit right away. We're going to be looking at the alternative cover period, which some of you may have looked at. If you've seen the application, we highly recommend that you go to the SBA's website and grab a copy of it. It might be helpful when you're looking through this webinar with us. You have it on a second screen, but it's totally not necessary. We'll give you the information that we need to talk about. And then we're going to answer a few questions. So.
Okay, well, thank you everyone again for joining. Today, I was out last week on vacation, but apparently on Friday, there were 2 rules introduced for the loan forgiveness, and a few of them warrant us explaining. So if any of you have heard, the change for the full-time equivalent was moved to 40 hours, and it's determined that anyone who works less than 40 hours is considered 1/2 of a full-time equivalent. So that should help with the full-time equivalent calculations. The other thing is they're saying that you will have until June 30th to go back and restore forgiveness if you didn't receive it during the 8-week period. If you restore your full-time equivalents back to what they were before PPP. Another important thing to note is
Paid versus incurred.
Thank you, Joe. Having a little trouble reading that. So we have the other costs that were introduced as part of the PPP forgiveness, your rent and your utilities. You know, a lot of us had questions, well, what if I pay it during my 8-week, but it's not for the period, you know, following, or vice versa. We typically pay our utility bills in advance. So the new rule says that whether it was paid or incurred during the 8-week period, it will qualify for forgiveness. Previous to that, it had to be both. Now it's paid or. The HEROES Act was never went anywhere. It was dead on arrival. So we'll continue to monitor things that are happening, but no more on that. There are 2 new bills that are trying to get passed. The Senate is trying to extend the payback period, the forgiveness period, if you will, to 16 weeks. The House has introduced legislation to extend it to 24 weeks and also eliminating the rule for 75% of the funds to be used for payroll. So I thought those were interesting as well. And then this was one that I think is going to be impactful for many of you, and that was the calculation for self-employed, Schedule C, owners of corporations. You know, we were all restricted to the cap of $100,000, which during the 8-week period came to a total of $15,385. but they've now changed it to be that the forgivable amount will be the lower of 15.4%, which is 8 divided by 52, of your 2019 compensation, or the 15,385. So if in 2019 you only paid yourself $20,000, you take 15% of that, and that's the max that you'll be able to have forgiven. I know that's probably going to be a surprise for many of you, but if you have more questions, please let us know. So that includes, any partners that receive distributions, owners of businesses, self-employed, Schedule C, all of that. Lastly, in this area, we've always talked about as soon as your forgiveness period is up, that you apply for forgiveness, the bank will have 60 days to review your application. And the SBA has introduced that they are going to have 90 days to review the application. So that's new. The SBA told us before they were going to audit everybody over $2 million and do, random audits on others. And now they've introduced the opportunity that they will have 90 days to review to either approve or deny forgiveness on these loans. So those are the updates we have for now, and turn it back over to Joe and he can continue.
Thank you. And one more thing on that is that I read there was 30 days to appeal whether or not it's going to be forgiven. So if your bank says no, you do have an appeal process. There's going to be more to come on that, obviously, but right now they're giving it a 30-day deadline. So the 5 W's and an H. So who are you going to be sending this application to? You're not sending this application to the bank or to the SBA, I'm sorry. You're going to send it to your lender. The SBA will receive it after the lender has dealt with it. You're going to be sending them pages 3 and 6 of the SBA application for loan forgiveness, which, if you have it in front of you, is the Schedule A and the PPP Loan Forgiveness Calculation Form. This is going to be sent in along with mandatory records such as bank statements, tax forms, bills, leases, mortgage statements, payment receipts, canceled checks. They want to make sure that you actually paid these people and not just said that you did. So you're going to be sending it directly to your lender. As soon as your 8 weeks are up, the clock starts ticking, and you only have 60 days. So you're going to give it to them as soon as you can. And obviously you're sending this in to have your loan forgiven. So our recommendation on how to get it there is to send it via certified mail with return receipt requested. That way they can't deny receiving your package on a certain date. But of course, some banks might not be allowing this. Some banks might be strictly electronic and requiring that everything be uploaded to a certain portal. So definitely check with your individual lender. So some of the general information required is the bank will have provided you with a statement. I'll show you what a general one looks like in a minute, but what it will have is a loan number, a disbursement date, an EIDL application number, and amount if you applied for one and received it. You're going to need to know your payroll schedule, whether you pay on a weekly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly, monthly, or other pay period schedule. This is really important. It helps you with your 8-week calculations. And it also will help you with the alternative payroll covered period, which we're going to go over in a few minutes. And last but not least, you're going to need to also know your federal ID number. It's also known as your EIN or TIN. It sounds silly, but we have had people reach out and ask what that number is and who's supposed to be keeping track of it. So here's that application sample one that I showed you, that I would show you. And in that red circle, that's the SBA application number that you need to provide them. The date that it was funded, that's the date that your covered period starts. So for this person, their covered period starts on April 10th, and they have 8 weeks from then to spend $67,200, and also their loan number below. So the documents that are needed to substantiate employee expenses. For payroll, you need to show bank statements or third-party payroll reports that document the cash compensation to your employees. So this could be if you have your May bank statement and you see from paychecks, $40,000 coming out on May 1st, another $40,000 coming out on May 15th. That's good to substantiate that. Another one would be the actual payroll journal from paychecks. They want third-party payroll reports. They need to substantiate it. They don't want it from you. The tax forms, so this is going to be tricky because your 941s are done on a quarterly basis, and I believe your state business and individual employee reporting and unemployment insurance tax filings, those are also quarterly. So it may give you an issue, but ask Paychecks, ask your payroll provider, see if they can do it on a monthly basis or if they can expedite this for you. For your health insurance and your retirement plans, they want to see payment receipts, canceled checks, or account statements that document the employer contribution. Again, they're not going to take your word for it. They need to see that the money actually left your bank account before they will forgive it. So the documents to substantiate your full-time equivalence, this chart has been updated. I know we showed you one a few weeks ago back with the old FTE equivalent rules. So I wanted to put that in there, make sure you all understood the new changes. But basically, you need to show them the average number of full-time employees per month from February 15th all the way to July 15th. And you need to show them of last year. And then you need to show them your full-time equivalents of this year from January 1st to February 29th. And you're going to need your payroll journals for both periods. That's from your payroll provider. The more of this that you have, the better. Let's give them more information and they're going to be easier to deal with. So your documents for your non-payroll expenses, these are your mortgages, your rent or lease, or your utilities. The copy of the lender amortization schedule with the receipts or canceled checks, that'll do for mortgage. Or what you can do is you can send account statements and from February 2020 all the way through the covered month. So if your covered month ends in June, you would send February, March, April, May, and June to get that forgiven. For your rent or your lease, you're going to send a copy of the lease agreement and receipts or cancel checks to verify the payment, or you can send the lessor's account statements starting from February and then 1 month after the covered period ends. So using our example from before, what you'll do is you'll send February, March, April, May, June, and then you have to send them July as well. Utilities, you're going to send them a copy of your invoices starting in February to the end of the covered period, or your account statement, which verifies payment dates and amounts. So the documents that you're required to save. So for some of those of you who have read the PPP application, on page 1, it says in the second paragraph that there are 4 components to the application itself, but only parts 1 and 2 need to actually be sent to the lender. That's not really true because 3 and 4 need to be saved, or 3 needs to be saved. 4 is completely optional, and it's about demographics. It's up to you whether or not you send that information in. We personally would not. And we're going to show you what part 3 is. But basically, what it is, it's a list of all your employees and owners, their wages, their full-time equivalent status, and whether or not they had a salary or wage reduction during this covered period. You need to also document things substantiating whether or not you offered people their job back and they refused to come to work, whether you fired people. That was something that we had discussed, and whether or not, if you fired somebody for cause, whether you would then be penalized because you fell below the full-time equivalent. No, as long as it was fired, the termination with cause, you will not be penalized. Voluntary resignations and written requests for a reduction in work schedule, those also need to be documented. That way, no one can claim that you won't be penalized. And we also recommend payroll records from January 2020 to now. It's just going to be easier when it all boils down to it. Here's that page 9, the third portion of the application that you need to save but not actually submit. This is one of the places where they did it a little bit backwards because you need to actually fill this out to then fill out Schedule A to then fill out the calculation form. This is all the way on page 9, whereas the calculation form is page 3. So you're going to need to do this. but you don't need to submit it to them, but you do need to keep it on hand. The alternative covered period, some of you may be wondering what this is and whether or not it applies to you. It only applies if you have weekly or bi-weekly payroll. I guess technically if you pay people on a daily basis, that would work too, but I'm sure not many of us do that. It allows you to start your covered period on the first day of your new payroll cycle. It's not intended to say, well, my business has been closed since March, I'm not opening till June 1, but I got my money May 1, I'll just wait 4 weeks. You can't do that. It's less than 2 weeks away. And so you still need to document your covered date, because even though you have an alternative covered period, which starts in our example on April 19th, the April 15th is still your covered period, and that still starts when the clock is ticking for forgiveness. So you still only have 8 weeks from April 15th to get the loan forgiven. So in our example, you have a new payroll period that starts on April 5th, a new payroll period that starts on April 19th. And you get your loan on April 15th, you can delay the covered period until April 19th, just so that it's easier and it holds all of your payroll periods for 8 weeks. So as we said, this is going to be the first webinar in a trilogy to discuss the PPP loan forgiveness. We're working hard on an Excel file that we will hopefully be able to send out to you to assist with filling out the application. We'll get that out as soon as we can. And you can always reach out to us if you have any questions. Does anybody have any questions from today?
I sent one in on chat. Are you looking at the chats?
Yes, sorry, we're just getting there now. So does this mean that there is 5 months before we know if it is forgiven? Potentially.
So yes, and I think, again, there's some more legislation out there that may hopefully help us define, but currently you have 60 days to apply for forgiveness, beginning on the day that your 8-week period ends. The bank has 60 days to provide you with their determination. So that there is 4 months. And then the SBA has 90 days to come back and question you. I honestly believe the SBA is using that to potentially look at, abuses of the funds. They're not looking to penalize, quite frankly, the volume and the manpower it would take for them to get through all of these loans. It's just going to be impossible. And so, but they are leaving it out there that they do have 90 days. And what they are saying is, if the bank indeed had made an error, previously it looked like the banks were going to be off the hook. Now it's saying, if the bank has made an error in determining the loan amount, that they will not receive their fee for processing the application. So what also came out is, previously, many of us were pushing back on the banks when they were asking us questions and not wanting to answer them. And the SBA did come out with more guidance and say that the bank is allowed to ask you questions. So I would expect that during the forgiveness period, it's going to get a little bit more strenuous with going back and forth with the lender. So I'd recommend being as prepared as possible with fact-based supporting documentation to avoid, questions.
The new formula for the 15.4%, that's the same as the old formula. It's 8 over 52, which comes out to be about 15% of last year's payroll. So as Melinda said, if you only paid yourself $20,000 last year, you're only going to get about $3,000 of that forgiven. You can't jump to a $100,000 payroll this year. Do they need copies of my lease for our location, or are the checks or bank statements sufficient?
It covered that.
And the guidance that we've received is they will need a copy of your lease. You know, there's a question out there, do they need an executed copy of the lease? Well, you know, I think that's probably going to determine, your bank is going to have to determine, you know, remember, they have 60 days to do this. So there's not much time. So I would provide a copy of the lease, but then, you know, more important, being able to support it with the supporting documentation, verifying payment.
Can you clarify the impact of terminating someone for poor performance, which is not termination for cause, and termination for cause, which is egregious? And if an employee was terminated for performance reasons, does that impact forgiveness?
Currently, what we're learning is it does not. So if you know, many of us are, you know, having to deal with many different types of employee issues surrounding this. And it is challenging. And so the rules have loosened to understand that this is happening. You could have an employee who just refuses to come back to work. You could have an employee who comes back to work but is not performing as they should, or, you know, is making things difficult. So all of that is definitely taking into consideration when you're calculating the full-time equivalents. And if you can document such notes and information, then it will not impact your full-time equivalent calculation.
I would treat this as you would an employment dispute. You know, make sure everything is documented, written warnings, verbal warnings, everything, have them sign off on it. Remember, it's not necessarily signing off that they agree, but signing off that they've seen the form and that they've seen the written warning. You mentioned that we can count utilities paid or incurred during the 8 weeks. Does this apply to payroll too? Example, if we paid payroll the day after we received funds, that was for the 2 weeks periods prior to the funds being received.
So this is the alternate covered period. So the first part of your question is no, it does not apply to payroll, the paid or incurred, but you have the ability to select an alternative covered period in this case. So, you know, as we presented, if your loan was dispersed on April 15th and your next payroll period isn't until the 19th, then your forgiveness period actually starts on the 19th. So your forgiveness, your alternate covered period for forgiveness begins the first pay period after your loan disbursement.
You can choose to have the 3 days covered from April 15th, 16th, 17th, but the alternative covered period will make things much easier and much cleaner as well. Okay, does that mean we need to make interest payments during this time when we are waiting? There's a 6-month deferment. I believe that includes interest as well, and it's only 1% interest. It shouldn't be an issue. The alternative covered period, let's clarify this just a little bit more. It's completely optional. And what it means is that you can start it at a later time if you want to include full pay periods rather than allocating between the two. So on our example, these people, we're going to assume 9 to 5, Monday through Friday work week. So they would have had, say, weekly payroll is $10,000. They would have 30% of their payroll attributable this period, and then at the end of their 8 weeks, they would have 70%. So rather than be doing that math, you can delay it a few days, start your alternative covered period with the new payroll period, and that way you're going to just be doing full payroll periods for 8 weeks. As we mentioned, it's not applicable to people who do monthly payroll, bi-monthly. It needs to be weekly or bi-weekly or less than that. Tenants at will.
Yeah, that's a good question. We have quite a few that are in this situation. and they're not giving us any guidance. So I would request that you reach out to your bank sooner than later and say, hey, look, I understand you're acquiring a lease, but I don't have one. We're a tenant at will. And I believe they're going to be okay with that as long as you can prove consistency in your rent. So if you've been paying $500 a month rent, and you've been doing that since February of 2020 at a minimum, right through the month after your 8-week period, that is pretty good substantiation that you are paying, you know, $500 rent and that you're a tenant at will. And for many of us, you're going to be able to go even further back that you've been paying rent, you know, for several months to be able to substantiate that that is in fact rental cost.
Is the Massachusetts Workforce Training Fund tax a valid PPP expense?
We're hearing that it is. We're hearing that any local state employer taxes are included in the PPP forgiveness.
In the cost to run payroll from our payroll company?
They are not included.
Are there any more questions from anyone? If anyone would like these slides, if you don't mind just sending us a private chat, that would be great. You can select, instead of sending to everyone, send to just Melinda Abbott, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of these. This webinar will be posted to YouTube in the next day or so, and we just want to say thank you. Oh, and one last question. Karen, yes, there is still a ratio. There is talk in the House to get rid of it, but whether or not that actually passes the House and the Senate and does not get vetoed by the president, that's yet to be seen. So we'll keep you updated on that for sure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.